Hi, B20. This will be part one of the circulatory system 8.1. We're going to look at blood vessels today and parts of the heart and the direction of circulation of blood in the heart. So we've got some obvious jobs of the circulatory system, like circulating the blood, carrying oxygen and nutrients to cells and carrying away carbon dioxide and wastes, but also temperature, because the warm blood is moving, is kind of kept constant in the body at 37 because of the blood. Hormones are carried, blood clots prevent blood loss, and we have our blood cells, white blood cells, that help with your immunity. We're going to be looking at the heart and blood vessels in 8.1, and we will look at actual different kinds of blood cells in 8.2. So our blood vessels in the body are arteries and veins, and the big difference is that your arteries are very thick-walled because of the high pressure blood that's in them. So you can imagine that the heart is pumping, and the high pressure is going to send the blood through arteries, and it needs this thick wall to help not burst when that high pressure blood is going through it. So arteries are always carrying blood away from the heart, and here where it branches is indicating how the arteries will branch off, first into smaller arterioles, and then they will branch off into tiny, tiny capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels, and they will get very close to all the cells of the body. And when they are at the capillary stage, the blood is doing the exchange of oxygen, nutrients, carbon dioxide, and waste. And as it's carried back to the heart, it will be through these little vessels called venules, which will then get bigger and be veins. And the veins don't need as thick of a wall. However, because it's far away from when the heart gave its pump of pressure, there are valves located in all the veins so that blood can only go in one direction and not backflow. So that's important. And those veins will take the blood right to the heart. And in this, it is a circulation system that is in a closed system compared to like a frog that has an open area of blood, open circulation. This is closed, and all the blood is in vessels. So it'll go from the heart, and it will go, change color here, through arteries, branching to arterioles, branching to capillaries, branching to venules, then to veins, and then back to the heart. The heart has a way of sending that blood to your lungs to exchange that carbon dioxide, get fresh oxygen, get that fresh oxygen back, and then it's on its way again. So there is a connection between the heart and the whole body. It's called systemic circulation. And there's a connection between the heart and your lungs, which is pulmonary circulation. So we will be looking at both of those. Arteries, the pressure in there is so strong coming from the heart's beat that if you take your pulse either under your thumb at your wrist, you can check it out there using a few fingers at a time, like 3 fingers, or you can put your hand under one side of your neck on your carotid artery, just gently. You don't want to block off blood flow, but you can check it out there. And those are places you can check out your pulse. And your pulse is exactly the happening at the same time as your heart is pumping. So every time you feel a pulse, it is when your heart is beating. And so you can, people check that when they're exercising. They may check it as a first aid thing. And that is being checked at arteries, your pulse. Veins, the one-way valves we talked about, that's especially important when blood has to go from your toes back up to your heart and with any flow that, I mean, it's continually getting pushed through those veins back up to the heart, but the valves are there to make sure that the blood does not go backwards. And so, as you can see here, your muscles of the body, even though there's times, even if you're sleeping, you think you're not moving muscles tend to be twitching and moving at all times. And all of the moving of the skeletal muscles is kind of pushing, almost like peristalsis, helping the blood flow through the veins back to the heart. Whenever it pushes through, it is not going to backflow because valves are one way, and valves in the veins will not allow the blood to go backwards. Our smallest capillaries, smallest vessels are capillaries, which are about the size of a hair, and when blood cells go through capillaries, they may have to go at like single file because the cells are so tiny and the vessels are so tiny, but they are branched everywhere, just like it shows you in this picture, branching of the capillaries everywhere. All the tiny vessels are showing you the capillaries, and in this way they're reaching all of your cells, or very close to your cells. And this is an electron microscope picture of a broken capillary with the blood cells visible right here and body cells here. So that brings us to the heart, second part of today's talk. And this is showing you an external view of the heart. And you can see that we've got a very large area at the bottom. This is very muscular. That's separated into two sides, the two ventricles, and that will give the major power pump action to get the blood out. And one side of it is sending blood to the lungs at the same time as the other side of it is sending blood to the body. At the top here, we find these two little, they're called, like in Latin, ear flaps. Those are the little atria. They are also called auricles, and that's where blood enters the heart and is collected before it's pushed downwards into the ventricles. So we'll be checking that out a little bit more. The vessels that you see here, vena cava, just like the vena makes you think of veins, those are connecting to the veins of the body. So veins coming back to the heart from your upper body will bring blood into the superior vena cava, and blood collecting from the lower body. So this is kind of like from head and arms, and this is from legs and torso. Those are collecting to the inferior vena cava. So that blood coming in through those major veins are going to dump into this right side, and as you can see, and from here it will end up going out to the lungs. And the word pulmonary makes us realize those are the ones that connect to the lungs. And we're going to have blood, we'll see this again, but blood headed to your right and left lung and come back and enter the left side, where it can then be pushed with a lot of force out the aorta. Now the aorta is your biggest artery. Your aorta has many branches here, aortic arches they're called, and that's because some of them branch to the carotid arteries that go to your head and brain. Some branch to your arms, some branch down to your other organs in your torso and down to your legs. So the aorta is a very, very important artery of the body. This picture is showing you the cross-section of the heart, and I'll be going through this a few more times today, but you can see that one side of the heart is visibly much thicker, and that is your left ventricle. I tell students to remember the phrase thick left ventricle, and that will help them remember that the left side is the one that is very muscular and will have all the power that will be needed to send the blood out to the aorta and out to the whole body. So that is something that will allow the pressure to get out to the body, and even that residual pressure that gets it back through the veins and back again. So thick left ventricle is the one that will be connecting to the aorta and sending the blood out. and it's collecting it from the lungs. So the lungs send their blood to the left side shoots it out the aorta. The collecting side, here this again, superior from the top of the body, inferior vena cava from the bottom of the body, that all dumps to the right side. So our right atria is this collecting area, right ventricle is where it goes down into, and this right ventricle is the one that will shoot the blood out to the lungs, the right and left lungs. The lungs is where we have our oxygen and CO2 exchange happening, and from there we're going to have the lungs send that blood back to the left side, and the left side will get it out to the body. So a couple of, let me just get rid of a few things here. A couple of important, go a little bit smaller, important structures that you also may see here is this septum, which separates the right and left side. Sometimes there's in fetal development, there is a hole in the middle that is because in fetal development, the mother is the one whose oxygen and nutrients is getting into the baby's heart, and so when the baby is born, that hole is sealed up. But if it doesn't seal up, some babies are born with a little hole in their heart, and that generally within a little short period of time will fill right in. But if you've ever heard of that, that's why it happens. So septum separates the two sides. Remember, because this blood is coming from the body on the right side, it is more full of carbon dioxide. On the left side, remember thick left ventricle. On the left side, because the blood is freshly coming from the lungs, it will be more full of oxygen. So here on the right side, you might be referring to the blood on the right side as blood full of CO2 and deoxygenated, and you might refer to the one on the left ventricle as oxygenated because it's coming from the lungs. Now, you may look at this and realize that you're on your right side, you're looking at the left. So remember, it's like looking, whenever you see these photos, they're all do the same thing. It's like looking at someone. And so if you're looking at someone, this is their left side, this is their right side, and that will always be consistent in diagrams that we use for the heart. Now, one thing that students will remember though is that if they take a look at a photo and they're like, oh yeah, I clearly see the thick left ventricle over here, I know that's the left side because I remember this phrase, thick left ventricle, and the left side needs all of that power to send the blood out the aorta and to the whole body. Other than that, I guess there is this coating that you don't see it here, but there is a lining around the heart called the pericardium, and you have that around most organs, like a protective layer. So pericardium is the one around the heart. You may hear about inflammation of it called pericarditis. Otherwise, this bottom of the heart, you may hear of it being called the apex. And other than that, one thing that you'll notice is that there are some valves here that you can find in veins, but you can also find them in the heart to prevent backflow and make sure there's a one-way flow of blood. So when we look at the left side, the major valve here that makes sure the blood stays in the left ventricle, even though there's all this pressure here and it's going out the aorta, this would be the valve that's coming, preventing backflow. And because it's between the atria and the ventricle, a lot of times that's called the AV valve. Here they call it the semilunar valve. That's another, hang on, no, that's not the right one. 1 second here. I was just looking at that. They're calling it AV valve, atrioventricular valve. That's the full name of AV valve. So just get rid of some of the mess there. Okay, so the AV valves, there's one on the left side to prevent backflow on the left when it goes out the aorta, but there's also an AV valve on the right side, right atria, right ventricle, and that prevents backflow when the right side, it still has muscles and it's still, pushing blood to get to the lungs. So you need a valve on both sides. You'll notice that in your notes, they mentioned that sometimes those valves are called, just get rid of this, your valves may be called bicuspid and tricuspid. And so basically what that is that there's two flaps here on the left side. Maybe they're more solid. There's a lot of pressure here. And there's three flaps that make up the valve on this side. So if you ever see this being referred to the tricuspid, this being referred to the bicuspid, that would be why. And the other name for the semilunar valves on the left side is mitral valves. And mitral is like very important because it is here that oxygen is being pressure, with full pressure being sent to the whole body. So I don't know, there's a lot of words for it, but this is the AV valve on both sides. This side is a bicuspid, there's two flaps. This side is a tricuspid, there's three flaps. And this very important valve on the left ventricle is also called mitral. Okay, those are important. There's also a couple of other valves, and those are valves that are in the semilunar valves that are in the pulmonary artery and in the aorta. So there's valves that also prevent backflow once they're in those major vessels. So we have 1, 2 semilunar valves and 1, 2, try that again. We have 2 AV valves and we have 2 semilunar valves. And let that sink in. Okay, so I guess what they're saying here is that we have a name for the muscle of the heart, that's cardiac muscle. And so muscle attached to your bones is called skeletal, and muscles that are found in in your internal organs, like your digestive tract, those would be called smooth muscles. And the third kind is the cardiac muscle that's found in the walls of the heart. Okay. We talked about how the two top chambers are called atria. So we have your left atria and right atria, and the two bottom chambers, if you're drawing chambers, the two bottom chambers, let's start that over again. Sorry. Just make it the same as your other picture. Okay, so thick left ventricle, so we have the left ventricle and we have left atria. On the other side, we have right atria and right ventricle. And right ventricle not as thick of a muscle. And it doesn't hurt to hear this several times over, but the right side, the blood is always going from atria to ventricle, so it's always flowing down. But this right side, I'll say this one first, goes out to the lungs, whereas on the left side, it's going to go out to the body. This is the septal defect that I was mentioning, hole in the heart. I guess in terms of oxygen supply, if you're thinking of the oxygen coming in from the lungs here, we'll always say this is the oxygenated side, the left side that's headed out to the body, and the blood coming back from the body is all the deoxygenated or carbon dioxide full side. And I think that those are words that we've all looked at in the talk. So I'm just going to go on to this picture which is someone sliced the heart right at this location here and did a cross section, and it was interesting to see the two AV valves here. The mitral is the one that's the bicuspid, and just to see that it's got two cusps, and the one that's a tricuspid, to see that it has three flaps. And remember, this one would be on your left side, this one would be on your right side. These two, the ones in your aorta and in your pulmonary artery, remember that we didn't talk about the flaps for them, but they also have three flaps. I don't think you have to know that fact, but this was a neat view to see all the valves at the same time. Chordae tendineae, what those are is basically tendons, cords of tendons that hold on to the valves. And I guess this picture might show it the best over here. Here, the chordae tendineae are these cords here that hold onto the valves so that they're not just loose in there. They're held on and give them some support. So when the blood is pushing on them, the valves close, and when blood is flowing through, it's allowed to flow through here, but when there's pressure, when it's headed to the lungs, this will backflow will close it, but it's always held on by those chordae tendineae in there, and they're very, very tough. Those chordae tendineae, if you were to try to pull on these chordae tendineae, if you were seeing an actual heart that we could do a dissection on, you would actually tear off a piece of the muscle before you would tear these chordae tendineae. They're very, very, very tough. All right, going back to our photo here. This is page 6 in your notes, and what I will have you do is, if you can find red and blue of pens or pencil crayons or crayons or something, when we do this photo here, it will be great, or this one that's similar to this in your notes, but it will be great to separate the two sides of the heart based on blue being the deoxygenated side. And interestingly, your blood in your veins does look a tinge of blue, and the one in your arteries does look a tinge more red, and that's because when hemoglobin is carrying oxygen, it does hemoglobin has a reddish color because it's full of iron, and the blood full of oxygen is a reddish tone. So when we talk about the right side, and we'll be using blue. When we talk about the left side, we'll be using red as we understand those two and what they do. So I'll walk through this one more time with these colors, I guess. And remember, we've got blood coming in from the superior and inferior vena cava. They're called something else in this picture, but you can know them as superior and inferior vena cava. They dump into the right atria, which then the blood goes down into the right ventricle. With push of this right ventricle muscle, it's going to go out to the two lungs through the pulmonary arteries, and the lungs are located here. So gas exchange is happening at the alveoli and the surrounding capillaries. When that blood comes back now, it's coming back full of oxygen, and it will be red. So it's coming back from these lungs through, now it's two pulmonary veins from each lung. You can see there's two of them. Pulmonary veins are collecting that blood, it's coming into the left atria, goes down into the left ventricle, and this very large muscle is of the left ventricle will push it out the aorta. It will circulate around the body before it comes back, and it will come back eventually through the vena cava again. When you guys get to this diagram, please do exactly the same with your two colors and follow and name the structures as you follow how blood enters the heart full of CO2, how it goes out to the lungs, how it comes back full of oxygen, comes into the left side, left atria, left ventricle, and out the aorta to get oxygen to the body. So you guys can work on that, and you've got, I think I gave you about 3 photos to work with to label. This one indicates the chordae tendineae right here. You can label that. This is a picture of an actual, like a beef heart that was cut right between both atria at the same time, cutting right down to the apex, so that when you opened it, you could actually see side by side where the right side, not good color here to use, but where the right side is in comparison to the thick muscle of the thick left side. So it's kind of neat to see that comparison in both of these halves of the heart. So you've got the thinner right side here cut in half, and the thicker left side here cut in half. You can see the chordae tendineae here that are holding the flaps. So these flaps in there would be the valves. These are the bicuspids that are holding the are making sure that the blood isn't backflowing when this thick left ventricle shoots the blood out the aorta. So the aorta, you can see, is kind of whitish, smooth muscle there. So guys, that wraps up this. We have a lot of cool videos embedded in our PowerPoint you can take a look at. And if you can do your diagrams, fill them in, as many as possible. This circulation around the heart will get really, really easy to do. So happy practicing, and we'll be back for part 2 in the next video.